Good day, my fellow Americans and good people of the world. Today, I would like to address you in regards to the present situation. To begin, I would like to quote from one of the United States founding fathers in order to put the rest of this conversation into context. The bonds of our union will be indissolubly strong. And it seems that today the bonds of our union were put to yet another test to see how true those words were when the nation was founded and the Constitution was crafted. It was imagined that we would have a nation that will have within its conscience and consciousness the sensibilities of everything that we fought for and everything that we determined that we would not stand for. Our Declaration of Independence puts into simple terms what America will not stand for, and the Constitution of the United States of America says this is what we stand for. And the Constitution itself is designed in such a way as to be an insulary protection for the people against a government that would turn on the people and then begin to do harm. And Founding Father Thomas Jefferson said the first and only duty of good government is to do no harm to the people. It's a doggerel sum up. But as such, it's to say that our government was supposed to be designed around these boundaries and these limits and these constraints, and was meant to operate within a principled framework to ensure there was just bounds by which we as citizens can socially and civically in line and in tune with what is just, fair, reasonable, and right, and to have a basic understanding of what is expected of us in our rights and our responsibilities and our collective duty to uphold the Constitution, to embody it, and to be the living answer to what does America stand for. And we have elected officials that are there to represent us, who are meant to govern on our behalf, knowing that ultimate power rests with the people, as we are a nation of a democratic nation that is a democratic republic that is made up of independent people. So we are a democratic republic of independence. And the ultimate power rests with the people, not just in the terms of we get to self-govern and self-determine, but also in terms of we get to decide who represents us, and we also get to decide how they will represent us. And if there comes a time when the government is not responsive to the people, it is the right, it is the duty, it is the responsibility of the people to alter that government and to establish new government that they see will be most likely to produce for them the American situation in which the basic founding ideals of the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness will be secured for all people equally, and that we will have the American situation in which we can involve ourselves with, and to which all Americans are welcome to participate and contribute to, that allows for us to achieve the preamble promise of establishing justice, ensuring domestic tranquility, providing for the common defense, promoting the general welfare, and securing the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. And right now, that is all in jeopardy. It's unfortunate that we have found ourselves in a position of suspicion of our government, loss of trust in our institutions, a sense that the rule of law is no longer applied to establish justice, but implied that it will be a measure of determining whether or not you will have your rights to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, whether or not the Bill of Rights will apply to you, whether or not you get due process, and whether or not the Constitution will operate as an insulary protection for your self-sovereign personal dominion against the infringement of the government coming in and telling you what to do, what to think, what to feel, and to be the ultimate decider of whether or not you will be able to enjoy your rights. The rights of Americans, the rights of humans, should not be left to the chance that in a heated moment it will be protected from people who have been given the sensibility that there are no bounds and there are no limits to what they can or they cannot do, and that left to their own devices, it's up to them to determine whether or not you can enjoy the full extent of the rights as an American citizen. In this challenging situation that any one person in America at any point in time can be put into, by agents that are working under the direct orders of the President of the United States of America is an extension of the President's self-determination that he has the right to be judge, jury, and executioner, and that any person assigned to work under his directive with the permissible agency under some arbitrary title, that he could direct any individual to be an agent to carry out his will however they see fit, given a simple directive of by any means to accomplish the forcible compliance with lawless agents who enter American cities and conduct raids in which they harm human beings to the point where we have experienced these agents by their own free will and choice, unbounded and unconstrained by their superiors, given the contextual understanding that they have absolute immunity and are to carry it out with whatever force they see fit. They have effectively taken the lives of 2 American citizens in the same city in a matter of just weeks apart. Just a short distance from one another. And to say that this was excessive, it was avoidable, it was unnecessary, is to say the least. But given what we know, based off of what our fellow citizens have done in great service to their communities and to America, to document these happenings as they're occurring. Because of them, we have the evidence, we have the proof that shows us what transpired, so that regardless of the corroborated narrative amongst federal officials who all sprung immediately to defend this outcome without having given any time or consideration to know the full extent of the situation on the ground, jumping to conclusions and spinning a narrative in order to project a sense of what these federal agents did was justified, while simultaneously characterizing American citizens as being deserving of execution on the streets by federal agents. And so let's get into it, because the can of worms has already been opened, hasn't it? And there's a lot of people that are really mad and frustrated. I myself have gone through quite a bit of emotions today. But I didn't find myself springing to the automatic response of anger, pity, and disappointment that I usually do in these cases. The first thing I felt was acceptance. And not acceptance in a sense of like, this is the new norm and this is the way things should be in America, but rather acceptance that this really is the reality that we're living in. These are our modern times. And no matter how much we wish we could go back and live in the comforts of our ignorance to think that something like this would never happen in America, we'll never be in that place ever again. And we have to make decisions based off of where we are right now. And we need to take responsibility and ask the question, what next needs to be done? Now, I have a tremendous amount of sympathy. I have a wrenching pain in my chest, and my heart is trembling, and a wave of sorrow is washed over me as I think of these two individuals from Minneapolis who were good and decent people. They were helpers in society. They were caregivers. They were passionate about public service, and they worked really hard with their own personal talents to make their neighborhoods and their communities better places, safer places. And with them gone, there is this tremendous void that has been left behind for their families, who are left in an unimaginably challenging place of grief. And they are going to really, really, really need the support of their community to help them through that grieving process. And I am extremely proud of the people of Minnesota who have stepped up for their community and promised to be there to help in that grieving process. I take a moment to silently hold space for both Alex and Renee. May their living memory be honored by our living answer to, from this point in time, what next needs to be done. The way I see it is that everybody needs to, excuse the language, chill the fuck out. We need to take a realistic and pragmatic approach to creating a situation in which we have a sense of order and self-control, and to approach this from a place of poise and determination, that we will not allow the evil of this unfortunate series of events to be the determining factor in who we are going to be in our choices moving forward. We cannot be defined by this moment and the worst of us. We have to choose to define ourselves in the context of the best that we can be. And it is hard and it is challenging, especially in times of great emotional turmoil and public upheaval of the normal state of domestic tranquility. These neighborhoods have been turned into a complex and complicated situation of negative events compiling on top of one another, coming from various different directions and all at once. And you see various people responding in their own and individual ways, and emotions are flared, and poor decisions are being made, and a very complicated, complex, and very fragile situation is being made even more difficult than it needs to be. And the only way to solve for that is to be poised within control of self-control. You may not be able to control the events outside, but you can control the events inside. And it's the best place to start if you want to make change outside. And asking everybody to just pause, gain a little bit of perspective by stepping back, meditate on the situation, put yourself in the shoes of all parties involved. Take the position of the golden rule and the platinum rule, Treat others as you want to be treated, and treat others as they want to be treated. And considering from that perspective, what's the best way to proceed forward? For those who were made victim, who had their lives taken from them by individuals that were incapable of refrain or restraint or self-control, who did not have the inherent sensibility of what best could be done in that situation in order to diffuse the chaos and the intensities and the heightened sense of emotional flare-ups and the heats of the moment, and from a place of extremely poor judgment, nefarious intent, and operating as a bad actor without care, and from a place of disregard for any consequences for the actions they were about to take. They harmed American citizens in the worst way possible. They denied the inalienable right of life. They rejected the notion that these people had the liberty to be there and to express their constitutional rights. And these killers took it into their own hands to cease these individuals from ever being able to experience happiness ever again. And in fact, through the behaviors of these agents, the last things that both Renee and Alex experienced was fear and a sense of threat from intimidation, and a sense of needing to protect others from these bad actors with nefarious intent who happen to be hiding behind masks and badges in full body gear, protecting themselves and having loaded weapons against people who were wearing street clothes, driving their vehicles and walking across the street. And any perceived threat that these two individuals, gave off that triggered the alarms of the individuals who executed them. From the perspective of outsiders that were not in the emotional volatility of the moment, the actions and the behaviors of the agents didn't make sense. It seems that these individuals, these agents, these executioners, were operating from a place of provoking and intimidating and instigating and putting off this presence that these agents weren't there to enforce the law, but rather to disregard the laws of the jurisdiction in which they found themselves, and then took no qualms whatsoever with discharging their weapons in excessive measure multiple times into the bodies of these American citizens who were no real threat or danger. These single individuals up against a encircling brute force of agents. These people weren't looking for trouble. Renee and Alex were not looking for trouble. They weren't looking to make these agents feel that they had to go to the limits of using their weapons against them. They were showing up and they were being present within their communities and doing what they felt was in the best interest of keeping their communities safe and to encouraging ICE to depart from these areas because ICE was disturbing the domestic tranquility of these areas. And when you look at it, it's unreasonable that people think that what ICE is doing is justified. Because Americans have been led to believe that there's this violent and scary force that is represented by immigrants and immigrants blanket general sense, and that there are these things that we must fear, that they're coming here and they're going to murder people and rape people and abuse children and kidnap people and, rob people and harm people and to create fear and intimidation in the streets. Well, all of these things very well describe what ICE is doing in American cities right now that they occupy. And I think of, during the 2024 campaign, the family members of those who were tragically fell victim at some heinous crime that was tied to an immigrant conducting that crime, and they lost their family member. Their family member was deeply harmed and irrevocably scarred for life. They were assaulted. They were victimized. A part of their innocence was taken away from them. And that their stories were used to justify why we need to do these mass deportations, because we have to protect innocence. We got to protect these people from the bad people. And it was so much easier just to blanket generalize and say it's all immigrants than it is to say these are humans, and so there's bound to be some bad apples in the bunch, But we can't say to ourselves that we are okay with denying the humanity of a few people that we can categorize under some racism, that those people don't deserve humanity, don't deserve to be looked at as humans or to treated like humans or valued as human life. Because someone that might have looked like them or talked like them, or shared the religion or nation of origin, did something harmful to you. You know what I'm saying? It's like punishing everyone for one person's terribly, tragically bad mistake. And it seems common to people who are in the grieving process to want to blame everybody for what happened because it somehow buffers the pain and makes it more tolerable. But these are the times when we need to, assuage the fears and to apply the balms of community and unity and love and say, like, this was a mistake. And we need to not, when things go wrong, we need to not go wrong with them. And I can't imagine that these family members who shared their stories to try to compel the nation to want to vote for the candidate that said they were going to do something to prevent these bad things from happening to good people. I can't imagine that these family members would say that mass deportation now equals execution of Americans on the street as collateral damage in the process of conducting mass deportation in a way to which disturbs domestic tranquility, disregards common defense, rejects equal protections under the law, traumatizes extremely young children, rips families apart, takes away good and hardworking people who have been here pretty well their entire lives. They don't have some arbitrary certificate with a rubber stamp, from the government that says, you're here, we know you're here, we give you permission to be here, and you can stay as long as everything's cool between us. And yeah, you can become a citizen if you put in the good and hard work to do that, integrate, come be a part of this, family and body of people as well. It doesn't make them any less deserving of human rights and dignities. It doesn't mean that they belong any less because they don't have that certificate. All that means is that the process by which they can get that certificate has been extremely complicated, unnecessarily bogged down by red tapes and complex systems and inefficiencies in those systems and deep corruptions and poor management and bad policies and terrible humanity in terms of the policing and looking the other way when violence is done to immigrants, and so the system has corrected itself. These are all inefficiencies in the systems that can be solved for. But in no way is there, a reasonable, just, fair, and right way to reconcile the murder of the execution of American citizens on the street in order to mass deport anybody and everybody, regardless of whether they're here or not and have been here and do good work and positively contribute and participate to society, and their friends and their neighbors and their loved ones and their family members, with this sign that everybody was holding up during the campaign that said mass deportation now. Like, those three things don't equate with each other, because I don't see how anybody other than, raging extremists who are hateful and want to hurt people because they take some sort of sick pleasure in it, that would have equated the sign of mass deportations now with the forcible removal of people that don't even have so much as a negative mark on their permanent record in some cases. And that in the process of rounding up just anybody they can get their hands on to meet some sort of daily quota of getting these people out of here, that in that process collateral damage of 2 American citizens have been executed on the street. And that their First Amendment rights and also their Second Amendment right was denied and rejected for them conveniently, because it makes the, official narrative of the POTUS administration that these people had to be looked at as being these dangerous threats that were being neutralized in order to keep everybody safe. And while in comparison to, the significant amount of damage and harm that's being done to immigrants and what that's doing to the moral soul of America and how it's eroding it, still, I don't see anything that's happening in there that where mass deportations now has to equate to massive violence and terror and erosion of rights and, denial of rights and executions and, the imagery of ICE creating war zone-like scenes, bad scenes in cities across America. And I believe if, my fellow Americans and good people of the world searched their hearts and souls, that they would not find within their heart and their soul a sense that this is right. And deporting people who have chosen to come to America, by a means that we can't say, aligns with the rubber stamp piece of paper, certified, this is what we accept as okay. In some cases, these people have those certificates. They're doing everything they were told they needed to do in order to be here in America. Asylum seekers, abiding by everything, trying to just be here so they can be safe. And they're being abducted off of the street with their small children and forced into these holding units, which are very likened to concentration camps. There's, investigation going on right now of a potential, based off of a coroner's report, homicide inside one of these concentration camps. Reports of human rights violations, people being denied their medication, living in deplorable conditions with terrible sanitation, inadequate food and water. They're being denied their rights to speak to counsel. They're being humiliated, and they're being abused, and they're being traumatized. What part of the mass deportations now sign meant that this is what was going to happen? And trying to reconcile it makes me angry. It's a righteous anger, and I feel it, so many other people feel that too. And I sympathize with them. And I know that anger is what's getting people to go to the streets, because they're like, this is wrong. This should not be this way. And so their response is to operate off of the sense that America still has the integrities and the moral standing and the legal, bounds and limits, that going and using your First Amendment right to, free speech and go and protest and dissent, that actually makes a difference. And what is being responded from the federal government is saying, we're not listening to you, but we hear you. And all we hear you saying is that they have not done enough to suppress you yet. And so what has the federal government done in the cases of these 2 American citizens being executed on the streets? But they turn up the heat and they make matters worse. They don't de-escalate. They don't try to bring down the temperature. They instead platform from their own official accounts on social medias violent rhetoric, inciting rhetoric, false narratives, assumptions that aren't backed up with facts that directly contradict the facts on the ground of the video evidence proving that their story, flies in the face of reason, and it says a big fuck you. Again, excuse my language. So what part of these people who were so, hurt and traumatized by, these few immigrants that, harmed somebody that they loved, how was that enough to convince the American people that these mass deportations now signs was a free reign, full pass, mandate to the federal government to invade our communities effectively, depending on how you interpret it, violating the Third Amendment, where they're posting themselves up in our homes. These paramilitary force coming and posting up in our homes and our communities. They're staging themselves in our communities. These are our homes. And they're patrolling the streets and they're watching Americans and, profiling them, violating their privacy, creating documents of them, denying the proof of their documentation that they are American citizens. None of that was anything that was discussed in the campaign, saying this is what was going to happen. We did see some of this happen when, POTUS 47 was POTUS 45. We had family separations. There were violent, immigration enforcement activity that was happening, but nothing at this scale. Nothing to the point where it makes us question our reality. We're literally being gaslit by the federal government, and they're making us question our own reality, and then making us, have deep suspicion of our government. And when you look at it, and you look in the wider context of what's happening in the world, and you see who it is that POTUS 47 is aligning with on the geopolitical stage, you begin to see that these actions are happening in a broader context where it's not just, American cities are under siege by this, paramilitary force that's coming in under the direction of POTUS to, create chaos, wreak havoc, and try to incite an insurrection, to which, under the powers of POTUS, he can direct forces to go in, put everything on lockdown, and somehow justify, as he implied jokingly that he would like to do when he was speaking to President Zelensky from Ukraine, saying, yeah, it would be kind of nice to be able to, declare martial law and then not have elections. And I don't think that POTUS 47 was joking when he suggested that. More like, kind of like in a movie, the bad guy will glean you the coming, events. For some reason, the bad guy always tells you their plot to, overthrow the world. And here we see this realignment on the, political stage and the international level, and it starts to make more sense that America is really starting, its government is starting to emulate that of Russia and Putin's Russia. And, the world is extremely outraged and angered and frustrated about what is happening in Israel's invasion of settlements in Gaza, in the displacement of people, and the anger and the frustration that people feel when we see our fellow human beings in Iran trying to stand up against some of the worst terror and to be utterly slaughtered by their own government for trying to dissent. And here back home in America, we have a president who is justifying the same thing, slaughtering of Americans on the street with no recourse in order to suppress dissent against government activity, of doing violence against people in America to fulfill some political agenda. And while the numbers are nowhere near the thousands of people that were recently slaughtered in Iran, but we should not have to wait until we've achieved some numbered quota before our sensibilities of what is right and wrong kicks in and tells us that we need to put an end to this. Two American citizens executed on the streets of America by federal agents under the direction of POTUS. That is enough to call an end to this entire shenanigans with the immigration enforcement and realize it's not really enforcing anything. It's not accomplishing what the little mass deport now sign even said. It's this cover to be able to go into American cities and towns and to racially profile people and to do violence without consequence, traumatize people, and all under the guise of, while people are so busy being outraged by this, they're not paying attention to the fact that the Epstein files still haven't been released, and they probably will never be released, and they're probably being completely scrubbed right now, and victims will not be made whole. and the realignments by in the international stage of abandoning allies and uniting forces with the likes of Netanyahu and Putin, by forgiving all of the atrocities that those leaders have led their nations to commit against the innocence of other populations of people in other nations. And that under the leadership of POTUS 47, America is now standing by in allyship and partnership and friendship and union with some of the worst offenders of violent wars, and has the audacity to call it a peace, some sort of board of peace, as if that these people could ever accord peace, when the individuals on that board don't even represent, or not even being represented by the people that two of the most violent offenders of wars in our present time, the victims of those predators, are not even on that board. So to suggest that it's peace that's conducive to, the welfaring and the stewardship and the protections of sovereignty, it's nothing like that. And so looking in that context of this bigger situation, and then understanding how the rule of law in America is being eroded, and there's a massive concentration of power into the hands of one individual in America from the position of POTUS, who is increasingly looking like he is in a distressed state of elder abuse, where the people surrounded by him and his cabinet are exploiting his salinity and his cognitive decline and the erosion of his health, and making decisions and through a president that just wants to be able to take the credit without having to put in the work. And so we're seeing the worst tendencies of these people that are surrounding POTUS conducting their own personal agendas through convincing the president to do things that are not in the best interests of America. And the president has shut his ears and his eyes and his considerations to the concerns of everyday Americans. He spends most of his time concerning himself with his own personal prejudices and worries and complaints. He spends more time on social media than he does on mediating the problems here in America that need solving. He's inciting violence, and he's using misogynistic and racist rhetoric, and it flows from his tongue so easily and conveniently. And he speaks about trying to create, policies based off of these morals that he himself could never adhere to. And so it's not about creating just, fair, reasonable, right laws that we need in order to be in union with one another in a mutual accord, but rather the types of laws and rules that need to be created in order to disadvantage some people so others can exploit their disadvantaged position. And you see a situation of our deficit is enormous, and it's growing by the day. And the House and Congress decided that they were going to fund a bunch more money to ICE because supposedly they were going to fund them to have cameras, body cams, because that was going to make a difference. When it doesn't matter if they have body cams, if they refuse to do any sort of investigation, or they're going to do internal investigation as if the watchers or no watchers are going to watch the watchers, and so there's going to be no accountability, and those cams are basically pointless. But they have this massive influx of funding, and Congress passed that bill. Like, it's perfectly fine that, one American citizen died. The bill passes in the House. Now another American citizen died. Now they're putting it on the Senate to say, don't pass this bill because we got to draw the line somewhere, and you guys got to, hold the line for us here, and refuse to fund, ICE any further because we're outraged over the fact that there was another execution of an American citizen on the streets by ICE. And you know that POTUS and his entire administration, based off of their chosen narrative that was very quick to respond in the defense of themselves without even considering the full realm of facts, and their narrative contradicting the basic facts of film on the ground, that they have no intention of holding anybody accountable or to reining in ICE's activities or to make American streets more safe or to prevent the reoccurrence of another execution of an American citizen on the streets based off of some judge, jury, and execution or decision of an ICE agent who, got a wild hair up their ass and decided, I have absolute immunity, nothing's holding me back, I got a little anger going on, and I'm just going to pop a cap in somebody's ass and, my ass is covered. Government's got my back, I'm doing the good work for the president, so, he will make sure that I get any pardon that I may need, or just not be held accountable at all. And operating with that sense of, impunity is enough to make any person be led to the temptation to disregard their conscience in a moment of discernment when left to their own devices, to operate off of a sense that, nothing is holding them back. And so with all of these things that we consider, like, why is this happening? And we're outraged and we're frustrated. It doesn't matter how many times you go out and you protest this. POTUS isn't listening to you. He sees you as, this nuisance that must be dealt with, and he's just waiting for the right timing to execute his ultimate ambition of evoking the Insurrection Act so we can shut everything down and then hold on to that shutdown as long as he can to prevent there to be elections at the end of this year in 2026, because Republicans know, and POTUS definitely knows, that on the merits, things as it is, Republicans do not stand a chance to win. Because why would anybody vote for somebody who's just chill with this sort of stuff happening and is not doing anything in effective, bounds, or trying to rein them in, or, even speaking out with a firm language of saying, like, hey, we shouldn't be having, American citizens executed on the streets? What are we going to do about this to make sure this doesn't happen again? I mean, there's not even a conscious, conversation being conducted by people in the Republican Party to say that, this is not how a lawful society operates. And they know that they're not going to win in the elections. And so if POTUS can have his way, he can shut it all down and then just keep things as it is. Even with their, small majority, it's enough for them to keep the control and ultimately achieve the insular protections of the president from being held accountable through impeachment for his failures to follow the Constitution. And so we're setting ourselves up for more and more failure by doing the same thing and expecting different results. The going out and protesting, I am not one who thinks that is a productive use of time. It has nothing to do with trying to reject people's First Amendment rights. For Christ's sakes, I'm here talking, expressing my First Amendment right now. It's not about that. It's about saying there's a big difference between showing up and expressing your frustration in a scenario where it's like speaking into the void. Yeah, it's going to get some press coverage, and yeah, it's going to encourage people, and they're going to have a sense of solidarity, and man, we're together in this, you're not alone in this, and these are all good things. But you can get that same sense of accomplishment by doing something that actually will affect change in such a way that is a fundamental leverage to pivot out of this negative scenario into one that is calmed and reasoned and from a place of integrity and is based off of the Constitution and our adherence to those laws, and takes back the power of self-governance and self-determination, follows the ultimate principle underpinning the entire Constitution, which says the ultimate power rests with the people, and that the federal government and state governments don't get to just take whatever power they see fit that they may need. It has to be justified in alignment, in accord with the Constitution. And if it does not fit within that, then they don't have that right. They don't have that power. And that's where the American people need to start realizing that we need to assert our power, and we need to do so in such a way that actually can make a difference in the outcomes of our government in such a way that is law-bound and enforceable. And so here I am again, advocating for Americans who are out there protesting to take all of that infectious rebellion and direct it towards us working together to create a fourth branch of government called civics, doing so through a constitutional amendment that reimagines the ERA to include the establishment of a civics branch of government in which all citizens have a role to play in the federal government, and to establish personal dominion so that we add an extra layer of insular protections for the individual against the forces of the government trying to come in and impose itself upon you to infringe in your life or to deny you your life, liberty, or pursuit of happiness. And so from this position of asserting ourselves as having a civics branch of government, personal dominion, and the Equal Rights Amendment all conform together, we are establishing a direct democracy. And from that, we give the American people the measured leverage by which we can come together, much like we do on the streets in protest, come together and to assert our pressure on that leverage to lift us out of the terrible situation that we're in, and allow for us to use that as a corrective mechanism to correct for the corruption and to correct for the miscalculation or the misdirection of policies that are leading us in a direction that we don't want to go, and to force the situation to come to a halt, to be reassessed, recalculated, revisioned, reimagined, re-engineered, rebuilt, and directed in such a way where we, the people, articulate the language as to how the law will be read and interpreted and enforced that reflects that which we want to have implemented in terms of government. And then government representatives will govern on our behalf based off of the language that we choose and that we want them to use, so that we can achieve the engineering of outcomes that we actually desire. And then in cases where the government officials are not doing their job, we have a different recourse than just suing them or protesting against them. We now have a corrective measure that we can take in a concerted effort to create a impeachment of an individual who is not accomplishing their job. And this makes it so that individuals that are in office, can't sit there in a cushy corner and do nothing. That they either do their job or they will be out. And we will put in new people into those positions who will do the job. And it's a position from which we can demand accountability, transparency, responsibility, to dissolve the concentration of power and to spread it out amongst the masses, and to bring it down to the smallest concentration of power of the individual, so that it does not have the tendency to corrupt. Absolutely. Which is what we're seeing now with the Congress and the Supreme Court, both our judicial and our legislative branches of government, are yielding their own powers, their separated powers, that it is their duty, right, and responsibility by oath of office to protect the Constitution, which means that that separation of power, they are obliged, obligated, and duty-bound to contain those separations of power. And they're failing in their job to do that. And that is an impeachable offense. But because Congress and the Supreme Court and many of the courts and the lower courts are instead yielding to the executive branch, and then within the executive branch is a bunch of people who are working hard in a concerted effort to undermine the integrity of America and replace it with this sense of Christian white national, superior race, identity, which is fueling the fires of justifying this violent attack on American streets under the guise of immigration. And these people are holding all of the power, and they're making the decisions, and they're not checking in with the American people. They have tuned them out. And when they see protests, they just look at it through the lens of these violent agitators that must be suppressed or shot if necessary. And they're perfectly fine with that, even if it means taking your life. And so these people who, have been corrupted by the power that they have, amassed and concentrated to them, and they've tuned out the American people. They're working for self-centered selfishness. They've deviated from the plan of the United States of America being a free and independent nation with separations of powers. And there needs to be a check on that system, to the point where, there may be Supreme Court justices that have been bought and sold, and there may be people in Congress that are spineless sycophants, and that the people in those two branches of government are unwilling to do their job to put a check and rein in, the power from the executive branch. With a fourth branch of government, we could override all of that and say, if you're not going to do your job in the judicial branch, and you're not going to do your job in Congress, and the executive is abusing their powers and not doing their job to serve the people, well, the people are going to take back the power. And we're going to use these mechanizations that we have leveraged for ourselves within the Constitution to say accountability for everybody. And to make sure that these people in these positions are forced to take extreme ownership for their actions. And for the American people to determine where we want to go from here. To let them be able to ask that question, what next needs to be done? And for that to reflect what is going to be in the common best interests of all parties involved. All relevant stakeholders will be at the table. Imagine what the outcomes would be had we, at the beginning of this year of the POTUS 47 regime, instead of going out and protesting the No Kings protest and all of the millions of people that showed up for that, if instead the people rallied together, formed, a constitutional congress to create the fundamental frameworks of what the language of a new constitutional amendment would say, how it would work, how it would operate, how it would function, how it would be executed, and then did the good work to advance this through the different branches of government to the point where we could get this exacted into a law, an actual true constitutional amendment, and for it to be ratified by all the states. Imagine if that was even just in the process of ratification by the states. It would almost be certain that the people in Minnesota would sign up for it. An opportunity for not just their voices to be heard, but to be able to take tangible action to shift the tide and make a difference, instead of always looking to representatives to do it, who many times either don't care or can't do anything because their hands have been tied, because the system has been rigged out of the favor of everybody. Taking back the power, it gives you leverage to do something. Plus it empowers your representative. Your senators and your representatives in Congress will be empowered by the everyday American citizen that has this leverage of the civics branch. It gets all the concentrated power of the constituency fully supporting excuse me, and backing their members of Congress. To the point where members in Congress would have more capacity to pressure other members of Congress to comply with those things to which their constituency asks them to do. Like to respond effectively to deny the funding of ICE until certain conditions are met to ensure that lives and safety of American citizens. I believe that this could be that uniting force that could take Americans with all of their righteous anger and direct it towards something that will actually be able to translate to engineered outcomes that are of their choosing, that can set things right, that would empower them to be able to intervene on their own behalf, to intercede on their own behalf when the government fails to do its job or then becomes a threat to the people. This was one of the original spirit of intent behind the Second Amendment, was to be able to protect yourself in case the government decided to rise up against you. You would be able to defend yourself against that. And in the case of the execution of an American citizen on the street, Alex had a permit, concealed carry permit. And it's reasonable that he would want to carry that, especially in a scenario where there's heated tensions in a sense that, he may need to protect himself. And what is the Second Amendment about, except for to provide for the common defense? The Second Amendment is very much a part of that language. It is very much serves that purpose just as much as military defense does. And it's really frustrating to me that those in the federal government, especially people who call themselves conservatives, gun-owning conservatives, are not doing more to call out the BS in which it's suggested that a lawful gun owner had it coming to them because they had a gun on their person, and they just shouldn't have had the gun on their person, and then they'd still be alive. If that is not the most despicable undermining of the Second Amendment I have ever heard, and I find it laughable in a dark, ironic way, that these same Republicans that dare to say the Second Amendment matters, man. We need to not have gun control on the streets, man. You're going to take my Second Amendment rights? No, you can't do that. It's infringement on your freedoms, Gun lobbyists said to me that's the case. But they're not standing up for this individual's right, Second Amendment rights, and not speaking out against it actually jeopardizes every single person's Second Amendment rights. And I feel very strongly about this because I believe the Second Amendment, again, represents providing for the common defense. To preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. But these Republicans who have refused for years to do any sort of gun control whatsoever, even when we have a huge problem with guns taking the lives of people in America constantly in so many different scenarios, yet they refuse to do any gun control at all. And they will scream, kick, piss, moan, and complain if anybody dare tries to touch the Second Amendment with any sort of gun control laws. But when the government itself, and from the highest ranks of the government, is saying that the Second Amendment does not apply when they pixie-choosy who gets that right, suddenly the Second Amendment is jeopardized for everyone. And these people aren't calling out the BS of that. The fact of the matter is we need to have sound and safe and reasonable and just and fair gun regulation in order to prevent, these tragic events, because we should never look at, humans as statistics or fodder or, collateral damage or, it's the cost of doing business in America that has, Second Amendment rights, that people get slaughtered. Children even, while they're at school. These things are not, what is just, fair, reasonable, right in a reasonable society. In a society that has legitimacy, in a nation worth defending, we don't have those types of situations happening. It's not, gun control is not about controlling people's right to gun ownership or to control people's Second Amendment right. It's to create a scenario in a situation in which if a person left to their own devices would go out of control and not to be able to refrain, and then would just take a gun and pop a cap in somebody's ass multiple times from a vulnerable position and not be able to control themselves and prevent themselves from doing that. It's controlling the person, not the gun. And you control the person by preventing them from being able to have a gun if they cannot control themselves. And you understand that by creating the appropriate checks and balances measures. Just to say, you good? Do you know what you're doing here? And then to have a reasonable compilation of understandings in the minds of those who do own guns of what is expected of them, because all rights come with responsibilities. Instead of taking the reasonable approach of saying, we're controlling the people, not the gun. We're controlling the situation, not the right. We're not taking the right away. We're taking away the opportunity for people to do wrong. And now imagine that applied in this scenario, in this situation, where these individuals who are patrolling the streets in America with loaded weapons, at the ready, given orders to use whatever force they deem necessary, with scant training, shortly over, a month and a half maybe, isn't enough for them to learn the necessary control to use in a complex situation, especially under the terms and conditions of, any form of policing type activity. And so it's reasonable to say that, some of these people have been, identified as former January 6ers. People who were very easily compelled and incited to take down the government from the inside the halls of the sacred chambers of our government institutions to try to prevent, the processing of an election. And in their heads, it was the right thing to do. And there was no self-control to prevent them from doing that. And now those same people who have now been let off the hook and never faced any real, lasting consequences for what they did are in positions of policing, this military type force on the streets and have been given barely any, training whatsoever. And we're entrusting them to make the right decisions in a heated moment where they are already revved up and incited to, like, violence is okay because, you'll get away with it. That there's nothing refraining them except for their own individual moral principles. And these are people who willfully chose to try to overthrow the government once before. And so misplacing trust in these people is costing us dearly. There's little children who are irrevocably scarred and traumatized by these ICE raid events. ICE agents are, beating people and throwing chemical agents at them, spraying it directly in their eyes, choking people, beating people, shooting people, executing people, ramming people with their cars. There's reported incidents of sexual assault. And so, with all of these things, and there's nobody in the department heads they're denying that anything's even happening that's wrong. So of course they're not doing an investigation. So there's nobody internally preventing the bad things from happening. And so they're just running amok. And they're going crazy. And don't you think this is going to do something to distort the minds of people in these positions? They're going to be revved up on this high kick of thinking that they have all this power and ain't nobody going to stop me, and all the people that could stop me have the authority to do it. Man, they're on my side and they're championing for me and cheering me on, and then you're getting a kick out of it, and then you have this whole population of, these extremists in the right wing who are so desperate to see the violence against immigrants like this is painfotainment, and they can't wait to tune in with some fucking popcorn, and they're cheering it on and they're championing, and it's bringing out the worst in them too. They're becoming even more emboldened to show their true colors of racism and Nazism and misogyny, and just hate and cruelty and indifference and inhumanity. And their violent tendencies and their violent rhetoric is turning into violence in more, expressive ways, to the point where it becomes physical violence. They incite others to physical violence. I mean, you look at what's happening, and from POTUS and everybody in the MAGA cohort, they're feeding off each other's, vileness, and it's bringing out the worst in everybody. And it's seeping over to everybody else who refuses to be a part of this extremism. It's still bringing out the worst in everybody else, to the point where we have American citizens who are taking to the streets in frustration and anger of what's happening, and being, pissed off, triggered by the President of the United States, even, and all his little minions and his MAGA cohort, pissing off the, regular, average, everyday Americans, antagonizing them and bullying them and trolling them and laughing in their faces at their suffering, finding humor in the pain and suffering of others. And so these Americans, everyday Americans, are just so fed up with this extremism that they're lashing out with their own worst versions, and they're saying and doing things they otherwise would not do. And it's not that they're bad people, It's that they're put in a bad situation and they're operating from a place where the only choice they have is poor choices. And so what else can you expect for, in a situation like that, for bad outcomes to happen? And so you're getting the influence of people that are bringing out the absolute worst in everyone. And then we get these terrible situations and you know, the voices of reason are being drowned out by the voices of outrage. And I've been making these videos like every time, you know, shit hits the fan again in another way. Trying to appeal to the commonness and the good humanity and the reasonableness of everyone to try to say, let's just come together about this in a way that is productive and constructive, that could help to turn things around and lead us in a different direction. And, you know, I continue to be somebody that is not an amplified voice. And I'm not out here charging myself with the duty or the responsibility to plaster my name and face everywhere and try to get my message out there. I wholeheartedly believe if people really, truly cared about making a difference and setting things right and to restoring integrities in America, they would find the voices that were resonating with that. As I continue to make my content so I can leave a record set in the annals of time, so you can come back and you can find this video and reference me to get an understanding of where I'm coming from, what my intentions are, and what I think about this moment. You know, eventually when I start entering in the spaces with intention to be interviewed and to be amplified through platform, as I ascend myself to a position of authority so that I might win over the vote of the American people. When you come back and you watch this video, I hope that you hear within it all of the reasons why this is important to me and why I do this, because I am trying to put out the good voices so people can resonate with that and tune out the bad voices so we can start moving in a direction that's actually going to be in our collective best interest. And the only way to do that is to go together in the same direction. So I'm going to continue to beat the drum of justice, and I'm going to continue to sing my heart song that it longs for, and an America that works for everyone without the disadvantage of anyone, so nobody gets left behind or kept behind, and everybody lives the good life. We don't live in a state of fear, and that we don't have to constantly go through tragedy, trauma, and craze. That we can find a way to defeat President Pandemonium and his cohort, and to help change their hearts and change their minds and bring them back into unity with us. Because what I hear from them is that they are hoping that America falls. They want there to be a civil war. They want to fight amongst us because they believe themselves positioned in a better position, and they'll be able to take everybody else out easily, and they'll come out on top. And they'll reign as overlords of the new world order. And they are going to be greatly disappointed that that's not going to happen and that they're not going to succeed. And they're going to have to learn the difficult, hard, but necessary lesson of what it's going to take in order for them to redeem themselves, self-develop, and then find a way back into love with the rest of us and unity. Because our bond is very strong in this nation. And what America stands for is worth more than the sordid interests of some, short-term blip in time, MAGA party, that while they may have the power to do tremendous amount of bad right now and harm, the lasting impression will not be what they did, but how they made us feel. And how they make us feel is not up to them to decide, because they want us to feel afraid and weak and impotent. But we need to choose instead that they make us feel the resolve and the determination to persist along the lines of a continuum of an imperishable world peace, to continuously reaffirm our union and our oath to our country, our Constitution, to each other, and to find the ways in which we can come together under a sense of mutualisms, mutual respect, mutual interests, mutual securities, mutual benefits. I appeal to your common humanity. Just for instance, tonight, with the great respect and appreciation for one of my favorite youth voices that was giving voice to a story in reference to many of the influencers that dominate the MAGA and conservative fields of platforms in the social media stages, and many of them expressing their frustration, discontent, disbelief of the events that led to now a second American citizen being executed on the streets by ICE agents. And it gave me hope, because it made me realize that these people can be reasoned with. There's still humanity in there somewhere, and everybody has a different starting point, and maybe this is what it takes. And I'm not willing to shut all of them out because of past and prior decision making and mistakes that they made before and faulty beliefs they were operating off of. They're coming to the light of awareness. It's our job to help to expand that light, illuminate it, help to show them there's so much more to see. Like, you think that is crazy. Wait till you recognize how absolutely absurd everything is. Especially when you look in the context, like, how could you stand by a president and their administration that is right now telling every American that your First and your Second Amendment rights are not respected, and don't expect them to be, enforced, and that, under the law, you don't have the equal protection to ensure that your rights will be observed and respected and protected. Because if you cross this government in some way, in arbitrary distinction, whatever wild hair they get up their ass today, tomorrow, or the next week, may have you crossed the line, that they say now you are on the wrong side of the line. And they're going to start directing forces towards you and rejecting your amendment rights. And that should piss you off. Regardless of whether, you're racist and you don't respect Martin Luther King Jr., I'm still going to quote him here, in a sense of injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And if you don't stand up for the rights of every American, you are denying yourself those rights. You're setting yourself up for failure. And the whole point of this exercise that we call America is not about making sure one, ideology beats out the other ideology and one side versus the other side. It's not about the Republicans and the Democrats. It's not about the right or the left. It's about the responsible party who's going to take extreme ownership of this situation and set things right. Who's going to help us to create the right type of American situation that's a welcoming one, that everybody can thrive on, that isn't going to, infringe upon your rights, that isn't going to have the government coming in and start telling you what to do, what to think, what to feel, tell you what options you have in your life, where you're allowed to live, who you're allowed to love, what you're allowed to say, when you're allowed to say it. Determine your fate and your economic outcomes. Like, this is what's happening. And the POTUS 47 administration is doing this to Americans all across the board. And while it might not affect you today, it's affecting somebody in enough degrees of separation from you that eventually the consequences of that is going to hit home with you. And how many people today did it hit home with when you woke up this morning and you turn on your social media feed or you turn on the news, and what do you see but a report that another American citizen was executed on the streets by the government? And if that didn't outrage you, and there's something about you that is fundamentally oriented in the wrong direction, you shouldn't wish that on anybody. I would not wish that on anybody. And I don't care. I don't care if you are, a part of the MAGA cohort, or you're a part of the Republican Party, or you're part of the Democrat Party, or you're a liberal, or you are conservative. I don't care. I don't care about those arbitrary, keeping the categories, schemes of divisiveness and orientation. I don't care about those things, because the way that I orient with you as my fellow human being is the person in me sees the person in you. I see your higher self, and I'm speaking to that now, and hoping that somehow some part of you resonates with the idea that nobody deserves to live in an America where you have to worry about whether or not you are going to be shot by your government, whether or not your rights are going to be protected, whether or not your friends or your family or your coworkers or your neighbors are going to be kidnapped. Like, you shouldn't have to worry about this stuff. I care about you as a person, and I want you to exist in an America where you can lay your head down at night and feel safe and confident that you're going to wake up tomorrow and it's going to be a good day. And that there's opportunity waiting for you outside your door. And that in the American situation that we're all working on together, that you have a safe home space. And you have viable economic opportunity, an abundance of different types of experiences that you can have that are open to you, and that you can share in the common human experience with whoever you want to. But all we ask is just some common decent respect. Uphold the golden rule and the platinum rule, man. Treat others as you want to be treated, and treat others as they want to be treated. Simple as that. That's the basic moral fiber that runs through each and every one of us. And if that was the case, we have everything necessary in order to stay aligned and in tune with an imperishable world peace together. I think deep down in our hearts, other than an exceptional few who have been led deranged and extreme, nobody wants there to be a civil war in America. Nobody wants things to go into such discord and disarray that, the military is going to be deployed to the streets of our cities. Nobody wants to, have America go from, a place where life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and freedom are common terms that we feel and we all experience, to a place where your life is determined by one solitary, unitary power that doesn't care whether or not you have enough money to pay your bills or enough money to buy food for your family, and doesn't care if your kid is one of the kids that gets swooped up in an immigration enforcement raid, or doesn't care if, your loved one was the one that was just walking down the street and got shot by a federal agent. I don't want anybody to live in this paradigm. This is terrible, And it doesn't have to be this way. We can start changing that once we decide for ourselves that we deserve better than this. We should want more for ourselves than this. And that, it's gonna take some intentional work, some direct intentional processing of grieving, because we are all deeply traumatized by all of this. We're going to have to intentionally move forward together in a direction we would actually want to go. We have to find a way to let go of all of this so that we can embrace the future and the, responsibilities to take hold of the future that we actually want to have. And to do so in such a way that, I pray, and part of our process of healing is going to be about finding a way to help redeem the time for those even most egregious offenders who are doing the worst harm right now. That forgiveness is not about saying that what happened is okay, because this will never be okay. But forgiveness is about saying that we are okay. I am okay. That even though that happened, that is not who I am. That does not define who I am. I am okay. I forgive myself. I forgive others. I forgive the situation. And I'm choosing to move forward as a whole person. What happened is not okay, but I'm okay. And to get to the point where we can accept that amongst each other. And I think there's so much potential for us to do that. It's going to be significantly harder to achieve that while we still have people in the positions of, the highest platforms of influence, the ones with the loudest voices and the biggest microphones, are screaming at the top of their lungs, and amplifying the voices that says that, no, it's going to get worse before, it's got to get worse, it's got to get worse. We got to keep pushing it, making it worse, or it's worse than it seems, or don't believe your eyes. And doing everything they can to prevent us from saying enough is enough, time to redeem the time, set things straight, moving in a better direction. We need to stop listening to the wrong voices and start listening to the right voices, and to become right voices ourselves. It says that we can't accept that as our fate. President Pandemonium and his MAGA government is creating a dog-eat-dog, mighty crush the weak, free-for-all hellscape in which they don't care about you. And they're rigging systems into their favor, and they are setting everybody else at a disadvantage. And they're undermining the rule of law and setting the world on fire. And they're plotting themselves to be able to exploit your disadvantage that they put you in and profit from your struggling, your suffering, your weakness, your pain. And they're going to delight in it because to them, it translates into the things that actually do matter to them most, which is their own personal selfish benefits. These are not people that should be entrusted with making decisions over the lives of others. They should be limited in their capacity to hold concentrated power. They should not be allowed to be in decision-making roles, and they should be prevented from being able to cause harm to other people. And they should be warned to not step out of line again and watched in case that might happen. And for there to be enforceable recourses and corrective measures that would be triggered upon them stepping out of line. And not because we want to control or limit their lives, but we want to make sure if they refuse to control themselves, there is going to be something that is going to stop them with a hard limit, that they don't go in and start ruining it for everybody else. I care deeply about you and your well-being. I care about your life. I care about your liberty. I care about your happiness. And I want to help to create the best case scenario by which you can pursue your happiness in such a way that doesn't prevent other people from being able to pursue their happiness. I want to see you strive. I want to see you succeed. I want to see you thrive. I want to see you follow your discipline. I want to see you bring out your best. I want to see you forgive, and I want to see you apologize. I want to see you take advantage of the benefits and opportunities that we are creating and reinforcing together as a collective. And I want you to consciously choose to do the right thing and not exploit others or situations, but rather to see them as opportunities to do the right thing. Because freedom is not about doing whatever the heck you want, but the opportunity to do what is right. I want to see you turn into champions for other people's success. I want to see you cultivate your best talents and give it in service to the rest of the world. I want to see you intentionally self-develop and mature and grow out of, your old